everyone, buckle up, because today we're diving into a concerning report about the Arizona Department of Housing.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about real people looking for a safe and affordable place to call home. And according to a brand new report from the Arizona Auditor General, things aren't looking so good.
Really?
Luckily, we've got an expert with us today to help us break down exactly what's going on and what it all means. Welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Let's get into it.
Okay, so this report doesn't pull any punches. It starts off with a pretty shocking case
Okay.
about the old Concho Community Assistance Center. We're talking rodent infestations, broken doors, unfinished repairs,
Oh, wow.
the kind of stuff you wouldn't wish on anyone. And it gets worse because the Attorney General's office is involved. It was clearly a bad situation. But here's the real kicker.
What's that?
The report also mentions over $170,000 in unallowable expenses, even a loan to a staff member. I mean,
Right.
what?
It's troubling, to say the least. And it caught the Auditor General's attention for a reason. Think of them like a watchdog, making sure government agencies are doing their jobs and using funds responsibly. This case, it's a glaring example of where the department seems to have really dropped the ball.
So this one case, as bad as it is, isn't the whole story, is it?
Not even close. The report actually uses the Community Assistance Center as a jumping-off point to talk about much wider problems with oversight in the entire Arizona Department of Housing. This case, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
And we're talking about serious money here, right? This isn't just a few misplaced dollars.
Absolutely not. Get this. Between 2021 and 2023, this one center received almost $1.9 million in funding.
Wow.
Let that sink in for a second, $1.9 million. And the big question is, if the oversight was so lax, where did all that money actually go? Did it even end up helping the people it was supposed to? Unfortunately, this is a pattern we see throughout the report. Similar issues, different projects, and a whole lot of question marks.
Okay, so we're talking about systemic issues here, not just one bad apple, right? And the report breaks down its findings into some seriously alarming categories. Like, one that really got me was the lack of site inspections. They found that only 1 out of every 7 required inspections actually happened.
Wow.
1 out of 7. Can you believe that?
That's wild.
It's like, imagine if no one ever came to check if your apartment was safe to live in.
Oh, absolutely not.
You'd be pretty upset, right?
Yeah, those inspections aren't just about checking boxes on a form. They're about making sure that people have a safe and healthy place to live. We're talking about basic living standards here.
Right. And then on top of that, there's the issue of, well, let's just call it what it is, questionable spending.
Right.
And I'm not talking about a few dollars here and there. The report found over $8.1 million in unsupported and unallowable expenses across multiple projects.
Yeah, that's a lot.
$8.1 million. That's enough to make anyone's head spin.
It's a staggering amount of money, and it raises so many questions. Without proper oversight and documentation, it's almost impossible to track where those funds went and who benefited.
Exactly. Like, one example that really stuck with me was the $7.8 million in unsupported emergency shelter expenses. Think about that for a second. Emergency shelter. That's money that could have helped people in desperate situations, people who had nowhere else to turn. Where did it all go?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's not the only example. The lack of transparency makes it incredibly difficult to determine if those funds were used appropriately.
And then there's the issue of missing and incomplete reports. It's like some grantees were playing a game of hide and seek with crucial information.
Yeah.
If you don't know what's happening, how can you possibly fix it?
Yeah, transparency and accountability are absolutely crucial, especially when it comes to programs that are supposed to be helping vulnerable people. These reports are meant to ensure that projects are on track, funds are being used responsibly, and most importantly, that people are getting the assistance they desperately need.
It's like a big black box. Money goes in, but no one knows what happens on the inside.
Exactly, and that lack of transparency erodes trust and makes it incredibly difficult to address any underlying issues.
And to top it all off, the report found a lack of risk assessments. Basically, the department wasn't doing enough to figure out which grantees needed closer attention.
Right. It's about being proactive, not reactive. Not every grantee is going to be a problem, but by conducting thorough risk assessments, you can identify potential red flags early on and provide support where it's needed most.
So we've uncovered some pretty shocking stuff here. But the big question is, why? How did things get this bad at the Arizona Department of Housing?
Well, the report does point to a few possible explanations. One factor seems to be staff turnover, especially in key oversight roles. And remember, we're talking about a period that included the COVID-19 pandemic, which really shook things up everywhere.
Right, and the department actually mentions that, right? That turnover and lack of training contributed to some of these problems. It makes sense. I mean, it's hard to keep things running smoothly when you've got people coming and going all the time.
Exactly. And speaking of COVID, the department initially used the pandemic as reason to hit pause on those on-site inspections we talked about earlier.
Which, yeah, okay, I get it. There are bigger fish to fry at the time. But here's the thing. The report points out that those inspections didn't start back up, even when things started to get back to normal.
Right, it's a valid point. And it kind of highlights a potential breakdown in communication and prioritization. Just because the pandemic created challenges doesn't mean those core oversight responsibilities could be completely forgotten.
Yeah, it's almost like they forgot that people still needed these essential services, pandemic or not. And then to make matters worse, there's also the issue of some housing programs lacking formal written procedures. It's like things were just slipping through the cracks because no one knew what the procedures were even supposed to be in the first place.
Yeah, that lack of structure definitely creates vulnerabilities. When you don't have clear, documented processes, it's a recipe for inconsistency. And unfortunately, as we've seen here, potentially really serious consequences.
So where do we go from here? Is there any hope that things will actually change? What happens
Well,
next?
there is some good news. The report lays out a series of recommendations. And, this is key, the department agrees with the findings and says they're committed to making changes.
Okay, that's a start at least. They're not just burying their heads in the sand. So what are some of the key recommendations? How do they plan to fix this mess?
Well, it's all about building a more robust and accountable system. That means developing clear written plans for oversight, conducting those all-important risk assessments to identify potential problems early on, and crucially, providing staff with the training they need to do their jobs effectively.
No more rubber stamping payments without proper documentation.
Exactly. The report really emphasizes the need for meticulous documentation of all expenses, ensuring that every single dollar allocated is used for its intended purpose. And there's a strong focus on accountability, too, with the department committing to reviewing past payments and even recovering misspent funds.
So they're not just talking the talk, they're actually taking steps to walk the walk.
That's the idea. Of course, the real test will be whether these changes are fully implemented and whether they actually lead to lasting improvements.
So what can our listeners do? How can they stay informed and make sure the department actually follows through on these promises?
You know what they say, knowledge is power. The full report is publicly available, and I encourage everyone to take a look. The more people understand about these issues, the more they can hold the department accountable.
This isn't just about numbers on a page or like bureaucratic jargon. It's about making sure that everyone in Arizona has access to safe and affordable housing. It's about real people's lives.
Absolutely. And it's going to take a collective effort to ensure that those needs are met.
Well said. Thanks for breaking this all down for us. It's been enlightening, to say the least.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, staying informed is the first step towards making a difference. We'll keep you updated on any developments, but in the meantime, keep asking questions, stay engaged, and let's work together to make sure everyone has a place to call home.